It's Conduit News Radio with Paul Harrell.
All right, folks, welcome back to the program. As you know, if you've been a long-time listener, you know that the Patriots of Act 746 here in Arkansas are on a mission to educate you about your gun rights. And Arkansas is a constitutional carry state, which means because of a 2013 law called Act 746, you do not need a permission slip from the government to carry a gun, open or concealed, in this state. And this was even affirmed by the Arkansas legislature with 2 resolutions from the House and Senate this past session, saying that Arkansas is a constitutional carry state, as well as the court decision, Taft versus State of Arkansas, where the judge said that carrying a weapon in Arkansas at this point is decriminalized to the point where the burden of proof to violate the carrying of weapon statute is you have to be able to prove criminal intent, that you are going to do something with that weapon that's criminal. So it's really probably one of the biggest transfers of freedom from the government back to the people in a very long time. And my next guest that's brought to us thanks to the Patriots of Act 746, KrisAnne Hall, would probably say that that freedom has always been inherent because it's a God-given freedom and not something the government could take away in the first place. KrisAnne Hall, radio host, constitutional attorney, joins us. KrisAnne, thanks for coming back on this morning.
Oh, no, it's my pleasure. I love being here.
So you're going to be in Arkansas. I want to first say this. You're coming back to Arkansas in October, going to be in Little Rock and giving a lecture in the Capitol Rotunda. Really excited for that because I got to listen to your classes 2 nights a couple of months ago, and I just want to say you are such a gifted teacher, and I enjoyed the lectures very, very much.
Well, thank you. That is great encouragement to me. I really appreciate you taking the time to say that.
Well, keep going. I mean, I know you're going to keep going, but I guess I was inspired by that level of depth about our founding fathers, about the concepts of freedom that they were pursuing, and how receptive everybody was to it. And I just thought to myself, you're doing this all over the country, and I think people are getting it. You know what I mean? I think this could really pay off in the future if there's ever an opportunity for example, the states to maybe step back up and reclaim lost sovereignty. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's our hope and plan.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why we've been traveling now for 9 years, averaging a little over 260 classes in 22 states every year. We're teaching middle school, high school, colleges, adult group. I have a state legislator class. I have a law enforcement training, which the officers can get actual educational credit for. And I'm just, we are seeding for a harvest. We are casting out the seed of truth for the Constitution and waiting for that to really, really ignite the people. There's a quote by Abigail Adams that really is inspirational to me, and she says, "We watch as liberty ignites and spreads from soul to soul," and that's really how it works. Part of the challenge that we have, Paul, is that people are still in search of a Messiah, and people are still in search of the political quick fix. Unfortunately, there's no red pill that we can take and no incantation that we can say. There's actually no political personality that we can elect that's going to change what's going wrong in America. We were built on the principles of self-governance, and our government doesn't work unless the people self-govern. And people have been miseducated for so long, and we've been taught the wrong things for so long that even the best intentioned people can go work in the wrong direction. And so what we hope to do is just, like I said, spread that seed, because Samuel Adams gave us a warning. He said, "No people will tamely surrender their liberties nor be easily subdued when knowledge is diffused and virtue is preserved." He said, on the contrary, when the people become universally ignorant and debauched in their manners, they will sink underneath their own weight without the aid of foreign invaders. And I think this miseducation that has overcome America, that has us more focused on tribalistic political endeavors rather than knowledge and virtue, is really, really the biggest threat in America.
Universal ignorance. I definitely think there's a degree of that. The encouraging part is, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I was always told that, you know, you really only had like 20% of the colonists, you know, back in the day that really kind of took charge and, you know, were pushing for the separation from Great Britain. So, I mean, first of all, is that true, or is that just a statistic that's thrown around that's inaccurate? And likewise, I mean, if 20% of the country really knew, you know, first principles, that would go a long way, I think.
Yeah, it really is. Now, it's difficult to know whether those statistics are accurate or not. You know, we didn't take any exit polls or anything at that time. But the thought is that there were about 30% in favor of separation, but of those 30%, only 30% of those were actually active in the battle. So we always, I think the typical societal bell curve tells us 10% is about the maximum real activity you can get with any group of people. But that's enough. I mean, seriously, if we have 30% of the American population educated enough to say, you know, I'm gonna understand that liberty is more important than comfort, and I'm gonna actually accept a degree of discomfort so that my child can be free, and then we will have the opportunity to really, really motivate and activate the bell curve 10%.
We're talking with KrisAnne Hall. You can find out more at libertyfirstuniversity.com. She's got a fantastic story, a constitutional attorney. And I'm reading an article right now, a lesson on gun control at KrisAnneHall.com. And I really like in the first paragraph, the last sentence, the Second Amendment is not about self-defense from criminals. Talk a little bit about what you mean there, KrisAnne.
You know, that article, I'm very excited about that article. That article has gone around the globe, actually. That article was picked up in Poland. I don't know if your listeners are aware, but Poland is going through some political changes, and they're rewriting their constitution. And the rewriters of their constitution picked up my article, that particular article, and are using it as a model to create a guarantee and a duty of the government to protect the people's rights to keep and bear arms in Poland.
Wow.
So I was like, woohoo! But that's what we have to understand.
I don't want to move to Poland, though. That's
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, I don't either. But nonetheless, I think that's part of the greatness of America. Actually, our founders believed that, and they said this, that they were creating a movement of liberty that they expected to spread throughout the world, something that had never been seen anywhere else. And I believe that when America is operating properly, we fulfill that mission. The problem is we're not really operating properly. And one of our biggest misconceptions is the source of our rights, the difference between a right and a benefit. And we have many people in America that call the second, our right to keep and bear arms, they call it a Second Amendment right. Your right to keep and bear arms doesn't come from the Bill of Rights. It doesn't come from the Constitution. It is not a Second Amendment right. It's as you said, it's an inherent right. Samuel Adams wrote an essay called The Rights of the Colonists in 1772. And he said, among the natural rights of the colonists are these: first, to life; secondly, liberty; third, property; together, number 4, the fourth, with the right to protect and defend them in the best manner that they can. And he explains that these rights emanate from the first law of nature, the duty of self-preservation. And what we have to understand is the right to keep and bear arms, like I said, is not about protecting you from robbers and rapists. It's about protecting your life and your liberty and your property from anyone who would want to deprive you of those essential rights. And if you do not have an individual and personal right to keep and bear arms, then you are actually a slave, because then what happens is that you are enslaved to whomever you have to rely on to protect those things. So if you don't have the right to keep and bear arms, if you are not, let's just break it down here. If you are not keeping arms, right? If you are not trained in keeping arms, and you're relying on the sheriff's department to protect you, or the police department to protect you, or the federal government to protect you, then the reality is you are enslaved to those entities, because the value of your life is now dependent upon how those entities value your life. So when somebody else has to protect you, then they have to place a value on your life. And if on that particular day they feel your life is not worth the sacrifice, then you are discarded. And so whenever any external person places a value on your life, has a legal authority to place a value on your life, then you are enslaved to that person.
I can't argue with that. And right now my listeners understand exactly what I said earlier when I mentioned how you are a really good teacher. You talk about George Mason in this article, and it really struck me. I interviewed, there's an author I interviewed last week who came up with a new book on George Mason, and he was just saying, people don't know about this guy. They don't know enough about George Mason, and how, and I know specifically you had several George Mason quotes in the lectures that I heard a couple of months ago here in Arkansas. So talk a little bit about George Mason and his contribution to the concept of the Second Amendment.
George Mason was a really passionate advocate for individual liberties, and he was an amazing orator. He was actually so passionate about individual liberty that he refused to sign the original Constitution, and didn't, because he believed that it didn't do enough to secure individual rights, and over time he believed that it would empower the federal government to become more kingdom-like. I wish that our founders would have taken a little bit more to heart the warnings of Mason and the Anti-Federalists. They had a really, really good handle on human nature and how human nature always interacts with government. But Mason, one of the quotes that I use from Mason is a very powerful quote. He says, 40 years ago, when the idea of enslaving America was born in Great Britain, he said the Parliament was advised by an artful man who was governor of Pennsylvania. Now, the governors in the American colonies were generally appointed by the king, so they were not elected by the people at that time. And so this Pennsylvanian governor was appointed by the king, had a loyalty to the king and to Parliament. And he says that the Pennsylvania governor said that to disarm the people was the best and most effectual way to enslave them, but he warned the government not to do it openly, but to weaken them and let them sink gradually. And the way I teach it, I say, this governor was saying, look, don't show up on their doorstep, collect their guns, because they'll shoot you in the forehead. What you have to do is make it difficult for them to get the arms and the ammunition and the parts and the pieces that they need to keep their arms and ammunition in order. And you also need to place in the minds of the people a peace and comfort so that the people don't believe that they actually need their own protection, that someone will come to their rescue and protect them. And so through that through that gradual disarming, which is an intellectual disarming and not necessarily a physical disarming, the governor of Pennsylvania was saying this is the best way to disarm the people. You convince them to disarm themselves. You make it inconvenient, you make it difficult, you make it unnecessary. And then Mason goes on and he says, I ask you, who are the militia? He says they consist now of the whole body of the people. But I cannot say who will be the militia of the future day if that paper gets no alteration. Now, you can envision him at this time pointing at the Constitution,
yes.
saying, we need this Bill of Rights.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, if we do not alter this, we do not have this Second Amendment, he's saying, he says the militia of the future day may not consist of all classes of people, high and low and rich and poor. So Mason was trying to explain to us that the militia is not the government, but the whole body of the people who are fit and capable of defending themselves.
And that part about the militia, KrisAnne, is, flies in the face of what the left says now about it. No, it's talking about a militia. It's talking about the National Guard. That's what it's talking about. And, I know that's preposterous, but that's what they say. There's tons of people that believe that nonsense.
Well, it flies in the face of most of our state constitutions as well, because our state constitutions, most of them openly declare that the militia is every able-bodied citizen of the state. Some of them even say, from 16 to 68 or something like that. But the majority of our state constitutions say that define a militia as every able-bodied person. And what we don't understand is that there's a difference between the militia as a general term and a militia as an organized term. There's a couple state constitutions that actually make that distinction, that the militia is every able-bodied person, and the organized militia is what comes under the role of the governor. And so it's because we have failed to teach the right things about these principles, about these natural rights for so very long, that we have lost track of the essential nature of how all of this works. And that's why we get into these arguments. I always tell people, look, there's really anybody who wants to have a gun control debate with you or with anyone. There's really only one question that needs to be asked, and that's this: do you trust that no one in power will ever attempt to take your life, your liberty, or your property through the force of government? If the answer to that question is no, right? If you can't trust anyone in power to never try to take your life, your liberty, or property away from you, if the answer to that question is no, then the gun debate is over.
KrisAnne Hall, it's always great. You guys need to check out her stuff, libertyfirstuniversity.com, or go to KrisAnneHall.com as well. And I'd like to have you on again, obviously, KrisAnne, and especially when we get closer to this October event where you're going to be back in Arkansas, going to be in Little Rock. Everybody should come to it. I hope as many legislators as we can get will be there. Let me ask you, KrisAnne, are you going to be teaching your legislative or your legislator class there at the Capitol, or do you have that planned yet?
I believe there are many people that are trying to make that work. I don't know if it's concrete yet. But what we need to do is to get the people to call their legislators and tell them, we want you to have this class on the Constitution, and we're going to hold you accountable if you don't.
There you go. KrisAnne Hall, it's always great to have you on. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir.
All righty, folks, we're going to take a break. This video will be at conduitnews.com. Get it, share it with your friends. A wealth of information on her platforms. And again, she is a constitutional attorney, talk radio host. So check her out, KrisAnneHall.com or libertyfirstuniversity.com. We are going to take a break and be back here in just a moment.